Well, if that was your first introduction to our Advent series this year, you can probably guess what bit of children's literature we have taken this year for a source of illustrative material as we have looked at the birth of Christ. And that, of course, is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which C.S. Lewis wrote to be an allegory about Christmas, about the coming of Jesus and all that he came to do on this world. And I want to begin tonight with a clip from the recent movie based on this book, in which 4 children in a strange land, in a magical land, are being guided by 2 brave beavers as they seek out the Christ figure in the story, Aslan, and try to evade the pursuing white witch who has cursed the land of Narnia with a spell, making it always winter and never Christmas. And then they meet this unlikely fellow.
Certainly is, Lucy, since you have arrived.
Look, I've put up with a lot since I got here. But this...
We thought you were the witch.
Yes, I'm sorry about that, but in my defense, I have been driving one of these longer than the witch.
I thought there was no Christmas in Narnia.
No, not for a long time. But the hope that you have brought, Your Majesties, is finally starting to weaken the witch's power. Still, I dare say you could do with these.
Presents!
The juice of the fireflower. 1 drop will cure any injury. And though I hope you never have to use it.
Thank you, sir. But I think I could be brave enough.
I'm sure you could. Battles are ugly affairs. Susan, trust in this bow, and it will not easily miss.
What happened to battles are ugly affairs?
Though you don't seem to have a problem making yourself heard, blow on this, and wherever you are, help will come.
Thanks.
Peter, the time to use these may be near at hand.
Thank you, sir.
These are tools, not toys. Bear them well and wisely. Now, I must be off. Winter is almost over. Things do pile up when you've been gone 100 years. Long live Aslan. And Merry Christmas!
Father Christmas, perhaps one of the most unexpected characters you run into in that book, a point of significant contention between C.S. Lewis and his good friend J.R.R. Tolkien, who thought it was a terrible mistake to include him at all, and almost cut from the movie by the director as well. Although I think it was a good scene that they ended up leaving in, and perhaps an odd way for us to begin a Christmas Eve address. But indulge me a moment, because tonight we're going to be looking a lot at this figure, and as he has been come to be known in our culture, this Santa Claus. And as we look at this character, I want to do 3 things. I want to talk to 3 different groups of people. I want to use some good British categories, so wait for a second for me to define these terms. But I want to talk to the secularist and say, go back. And I want to talk to the pagan and say, go up. And I want to talk to the Christian and say, come down. And I said, let me define what I mean by those terms. By secularist, I mean one who finds the supernatural to be fake and foreign. And by pagan, as C.S. Lewis defined it, I mean the one who finds the supernatural to be real, but ultimately fearful. And by the Christian, I mean the one who has come to know the supernatural as good news through Jesus and accepts that supernatural through faith. And as I said, I want to bring along Santa Claus to be our guide. So then off we go. And beginning this evening, as we're going to be talking about Santa Claus, I want to address the confusion that actually surrounds this interesting character, even though we live in an era where there is a more unified picture of Santa Claus than there ever was in history. Thanks to global marketing, you can travel almost anywhere in the world, and if I say Santa Claus, almost every culture now will picture almost the same image, the same symbol. But what's increasingly confusing about Santa is the question, what's he all about? Why do we use Santa as a symbol? What does he represent? And what is the Christmas season in which Santa Claus pictures so prominently in our culture and now so many others? What is that season all about? And you can see that thread of confusion running through pop culture. And I see three kind of predominant different areas of guessing or speculation about how Santa's meant to fit in. And the first is this, that Santa Claus is really a symbol in search of a meaning. That's what Santa's all about. And I think this recent comic strip I saw was actually pretty insightful, if we can get that up on the screen there. These two people discussing how meta Christmas is. Because it's a season all about trying to find out what the meaning of the season is all about. It's a season chasing its own tail, if you will. And I think for many, that's exactly what Christmas is all about. It's a sense of longing for something that's not quite described, and we've gotten to the point where it's almost like the season is just about feeling the longing. Coca-Cola is also tapping into this. I saw this on a billboard on Sprague. What is Christmas all about, Santa? Taste the feeling. What is that supposed to mean? Right? It's a slogan that is absolutely ridiculous if you try to explain it, but it isn't far off, I think, from how many people are approaching tonight and approaching tomorrow. There is a feeling of wonder, comfort, love, etc. that they want to wash over them, but it's a feeling that isn't connected to anything specific, and it can't be because we are too advanced of a people to entertain silly myths and fairy tales, let alone to be open to the idea that there really is something wonderful and mysterious about our world. And for some, Santa is a symbol in search of a meaning, but for millions of children, he is a parenting tactic. He's a law without a savior. Anyone ever used this old carol as leverage? Anybody not use this carol as leverage? For some, the concept of Santa is like your annual performance review. He comes to give out presents if you've been good, and ostensibly withhold them if you've been bad. And since presents almost always end up under the tree, we are forced to conclude that we are all pretty good every year. But think about it. The naughty, nice Santa is not a Santa of grace. He's a Santa of law. He is not representing a free gift given undeservedly, but declares our worth. We deserve those presents, otherwise Santa wouldn't have given them. That feeling of expectation, of humility, and of gratitude is replaced with entitlement. And maybe that is what we really want Christmas to be all about, even for adults. Because for many, Christmas and even Santa Claus has come to be a form of self-worship. I ran across this article just this week on CNN, not on Nickelodeon. It wasn't written to children, it was written to adults. Christmas is about finding what's holy in all of us. Is this what Christmas is really about? Is this what Santa represents? a good feeling that brings us the gifts we deserve to highlight our own holiness. If Santa were here tonight, I think even he might be tempted to utter a "bah, humbug" at that idea. So what is Santa all about? What is Christmas all about? And to answer that question, we must embark on a magical journey, not through a mythical realm, but through our own history. And so I begin tonight by challenging those who have dismissed the supernatural as fake to go back to a time when you were still willing to see the actual wonder and magic in the world. When you're still willing to acknowledge that just because you can put a name on something doesn't reduce its wonder. C.S. Lewis wrote, "It looks to me, neighbors, as though we shall have to set about becoming true pagans, if only as a preliminary to becoming Christians. For, in a sense, all that Christianity adds to paganism is the cure. It confirms the old belief that in this universe we are up against living power, that there is a real right and that we have failed to obey it, that existence is beautiful and terrifying. It adds a wonder of which paganism had not distinctly heard, that the mighty one who has come down to help us, to remove our guilt, to reconcile us." Santa Claus has an interesting history. And he's a little bit like a Matryoshka doll I got when I was in the Ukraine some years ago, where he's like traditions nested inside of other traditions. The actual common day picture of Santa Claus that you see on the screen there, which is what most people think of when they think of Santa Claus, it's an American pronunciation, an image that is largely a result of a poem called An Account of a Visit from St. Nicholas, that you probably better know as the poem written by Clement Clark Moore, an Episcopal minister in 1822, who began with the words, "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house," a poem he almost refused to allow be published because it was the first thing he had ever written on the subject that stripped Santa or Nicholas of any religious meaning. But it spread like wildfire, and that, joined to a particularly clever and timely campaign by Coca-Cola, took the image that we now have of Santa Claus and branded it across the Western world and now across really the entire world to this day. But Santa Claus is really just an Americanized pronunciation of a Dutch word, and I'm going to butcher it for those of you that are Dutch. I apologize. Sinterklaas. Sinterklaas, which was the celebration the Dutch brought with them over to America when they migrated here. They celebrated on December 6th with the giving of presents and merrymaking, but even Sinterklaas was a localized pronunciation of another name. That name is Saint Nicholas. Saint Nicholas of Myra. He was a real man who ministered in Turkey until his death all the way back in the year 343 on December 6th. He was a preacher of the gospel, a fierce defender of theology. He's actually, in his original time, more known for having punched the leading heretic of the day in the face at a famous church council than he was for his presence. But he was known for being a compassionate friend to children and to the poor. He gave away his family inheritance, was known for giving gifts to many children who were poor. He did not dress in the fancy garbs of the clergy of the day and had an everyman air about him that was well attested. He was beloved by all. This is the first layer of Santa. He was the Christmas emissary. He was the representative of the gospel who brought gifts to men because God had brought his gift to earth. In fact, he once said, "The giver of every good and perfect gift has called upon us to mimic God's giving by grace through faith, and this is not of ourselves." He was the Christmas emissary. Another term that we have, if you were to take the next layer of that Matryoshka doll apart, is Kris Kringle. Perhaps you've heard of that. The name Kris Kringle is also today synonymous with Santa, but it was not always so. It is an Americanized pronunciation of the German tradition Christkindl, which means Christ child. This was a tradition begun by none other than Martin Luther. And he started it with his family, and the idea quickly spread. Where did Christmas presents come from under the tree on Christmas Day? Martin Luther told his family, from the Christ child. And they often depicted then, going forward, the Christkindl as an angel, representing the baby Jesus, who would travel with St. Nicholas, spreading good news of the gospel and gifts for all. And so Christkindl is not the name of Santa Claus, as certain popular holiday movies suggest. It is a reference to God's holy angel, or even to the infant Jesus himself as the emblem of Christmas. Santa Claus points us to the emissary of Christmas. Christkindl points us back to the very emblem of Christmas, the Christ child himself. And that brings us to the fellow that we met at the beginning, Father Christmas. Also now synonymous with Santa Claus, but once a separate idea. And I say idea because Father Christmas was not meant to be a unique character, but he was the embodiment of the Christmas spirit. He was meant to be a symbol of the joy and celebration which particularly adults were to have in remembering the birth of Jesus. Father Christmas had nothing to do with children for well over 100 years of his tradition. It was about adults and how they were to celebrate and make merry in remembering Jesus Christ. The ghost of Christmas Present in Dickens' masterpiece, A Christmas Carol, is based on this original idea of Father Christmas, and that story was attributed by G.K. Chesterton and to some degree C.S. Lewis as well as being what saved the idea of Christmas in London. Father Christmas was meant to show us the value of good cheer in response to good news. And so Santa Claus is the Christmas emissary, Christkindl, the Christmas emblem, and Father Christmas is the Christmas embodiment. This, then, is the meaning of Santa and his message. It is the reason for the symbol. It is the reason why we come back to remember, wrapping around all these traditions, but remember the reality of the good news that Jesus Christ was born of a virgin, laid in a manger, lived a perfect and sinless life, was slain for the sins of the world, rose bodily from the grave as proof of his victory over death, and then rose again into heaven. In fact, if you were to go back and ask the Apostle Paul, what's the magic of Christmas? I think he would refer you to the letter he wrote to his friend Timothy in 1 Timothy 3:16, where he said this, by common confession, great is the mystery of godliness. What is this secret that is revealed to us now? It is this, he who was revealed in the flesh was vindicated in the Spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up in glory. To the pagan tonight, to the one who says, I feel that there is magic in this world, that there is something that cannot be explained through the empirical studies in and of themselves, I say, come up. Come up. See here the cure to your condition. Come to Jesus and see the threads that run through Christmas and through the heart stories, really, of every culture that point always back to the hope of an infant Savior, a God born on earth. But finally, I want to appeal to Christians, to those who have come to know Jesus already, and to you and to me, I say, we must come down. The secularist needs to remember that there is magic in this world and that we are in peril. The pagan needs to be reminded that the cure for our condition is found in Jesus, who lifts us up to heaven. But Christians sometimes need to be reminded that our great hope of the gospel should have an impact right here in this life and in this world today. And so, Christian, come down. Lewis said elsewhere, the very pagan thing we do on December 25th of singing and feasting because a God has been born just may be our way back not only to heaven, but to earth too. A recent Pew Research Center poll showed that the number of people who celebrate Christmas as a religious holiday is dropping rapidly. In other words, Santa is getting farther and farther from Bethlehem with each year that passes, and that's understandable. Santa is a symbol, and a symbol carries only as much meaning as we give to it, and we give it less each year. So now even Santa is drinking Coca-Cola and trying to taste the feeling. This year, let's flip that on its head. Let's take all our traditions, all our symbols, all our food and revelry, all our games, all our lights, all our decorations, and let us pull them in close about the manger. Let us fill them with the meaning that they are meant to shine upon our observation of Jesus' birth. If we are not careful, one day Jesus himself will be nothing more than a story that our culture rolls into the Santa story. Another pretty picture to surround an indefinable ache in our hearts each year. Jesus is not a symbol. Jesus is Christmas. Any good cheer to be found in our celebrations is an exercise in delusion, apart from this great truth at the heart of the season. Jesus is Christmas. Connect the dots this year from Santa's ho, ho, ho to that actual silent night, holy night, with shepherds watching and in a nondescript stable, the God of the universe taking his first breath in human flesh. And as we gaze on his small form, with knowledge of how his life will change all of history, you can almost taste the feeling. Let us let Christmas be rich this year. Don't evacuate it of its splendor, but instead fill it with its meaning, so that in our hearts and in our homes and through our hands, the good news of Jesus Christ would appear brighter and more attractive year by year, generation by generation, from Jerusalem to the uttermost parts of the earth. Amen.